Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. It's a bye week, and I almost forgot I have to do a daily podcast. I'm just, it's Tuesday, and here we are, 2:15, recording this. I apologize. I should have gotten something out a little bit earlier, but no, I appreciate everybody that's supported the Blockcast this season. It's been a lot of fun, and had a lot of fun Sunday night recording with the whole gang. So appreciate everybody there. And with the Utah Blockcast, if you guys wouldn't mind, go into your podcast platforms, subscribing, liking, give those 5-star ratings a little boost. I greatly appreciate all the support and everything, and it's been a lot of fun. And also make sure you can go to YouTube and watch some of these episodes as well. And today's episode isn't going to include any sort of video, but we typically do have video with our YouTube content. So keep that in mind moving forward the rest of the season. And, especially with, these home games coming up, we're going to have a lot of good quality video content coming up. With it being a bye week, it's kind of an interesting time. We don't have media availability this week. I don't even think there's going to be a coach's show this week with Kyle Whittingham. So, we are leaning all the way into a bye week, into our week off. And so it's kind of a unique time. And I think this is a good time to, reflect on some things 5 games into the season and ask some questions and answer some questions. And I've got 5 burning questions for today's episode that I think everybody is certainly wondering about. And I think that's going to be what I talk about today. Throughout the rest of the week, going to be doing a little bit of basketball conversation with Utah starting up practices, and we had a media availability up there with Alex Jensen, Wes Wilcox, and all of the players. And it was good to hear from them. Good to get their thoughts on, the upcoming season, on the team and how things have gone. And I think that'll be fun to dive into with it being the bye week. And I think, it's right around the corner. Basketball season is, and with this new era with Alex Jensen and Wes Wilcox at the helm, I think there should be a lot of excitement for this program. And, with the roster and it being, a completely new roster, there's been a clear shift in terms of what is prioritized in terms of athleticism and talent and all of that sort of stuff. And I think it's going to lead to a more exciting product this year. And we'll see how competitive Utah will be this season in the Big 12. But, I think this is a group that'll play a brand of basketball that I think everybody will enjoy and certainly be proud of, or at least that's what Jensen and Wilcox are building this program with that in mind, is building a team, a program that this fan base can be proud of. So gonna have a lot of fun diving more into that. But let's get into some of these questions. I've got 5 burning questions that I think will be good to dive into. And so we'll start with this one. Obviously, tough news over the weekend was Utah losing Nate Ritchie, and that is obviously the second safety that Utah has lost to a season-ending injury. So with Rabbit Evans and Nate Ritchie out, what's the plan in the secondary? Is Utah's depth at safety a concern now? I think it's very fair to say that depth is a concern now. When you lose 2 safeties that were, expected to, play pretty significant roles in that room and in the defense specifically, lose those 2, and it's tough, right? It's tough to replace those guys. And Utah had the luxury of having Ritchie, in the room as sort of that third safety behind Rabbit Evans, and you felt good about what Ritchie brought to the field with his experience and time in the program. But now you've lost him, and it's going to be a bit of a process for Utah in terms of ironing out the defensive secondary and what that safety room, the level of play in that safety room as well. And I think what we saw against West Virginia was, it's going to be on Nate Tillman to be the guy to step up. And I'll say this about Nate is, everybody is going to point to that blown opportunity in coverage, and that is a play that is something he's got to learn how to make, in the moment, and it's certainly going to be a play that Morgan Scalley and Coach Whittingham and the defensive staff coach Tillman up on in terms of how to handle it. But outside of that play, I thought Tillman was actually pretty impressive filling in for Richie against West Virginia. And, with Tillman, playing against a West Virginia team that didn't put a lot of stress on you in terms of attacking downfield through the air, it was a heavy run game. I think that suits Tillman, or at least suited Tillman much better in that moment. And I think for him to get that game under his belt and to have some mistakes that he could learn from in a game that, it wasn't going to cost you the chance at a win, I think that's really beneficial for Tillman moving forward. And I think for him getting this week and next week to get ready for what's going to be coming to Rice-Eccles Stadium and the upcoming schedule with Arizona State, BYU, and Colorado, I think that was a silver lining to the timing of the injury, like we talked about on our last Utah Blockcast episode, and I think that's a big thing. But it's not going to be entirely on Tillman to step up and make those plays. Morgan Scalley's talked about the versatility that they have in that defensive secondary, and I think that's going to be something that maybe we see a little bit. We see what that actually looks like, without Richie and Evans. Now, obviously, those two were very versatile players that contributed to that being a thing. But now it's about finding out who you have behind those two, and perhaps it is just going to be on Tillman. But I think Jackson Benny can be a guy that can play that role potentially. And you've also got a guy in Jeremiah Caldwell who has joined the program as a cornerback. But when you go back to his time at the JUCO level, he was playing a lot of safety. And that can be something that Utah looks to potentially utilize to help the depth in that room as well. So we'll see what sort of adjustments they make there. But even beyond just the guys in the secondary, I think, it's going to be important for everybody else on the field to step up, right? I think it's going to be important for the defensive front seven to continue to control the line of scrimmage, to get pressure on quarterbacks, to make life easier on the defensive secondary. And, it will be interesting to see as well how and if, Scalley makes any sort of adjustments, if he adapts to what they have personnel wise in the secondary. Do they make some changes? We've seen over the years that Morgan Scalley has incorporated a number of different looks and different players to maximize their ability. And I think that could be really interesting to follow as well. But obviously the most important thing here is Utah is in their bye week. It's a chance to get healthy first and foremost, but then also it's an opportunity for Scalley and the safety coaches to spend a lot of time with Tillman to get him up to speed as much as possible. So I think that's going to be the key here. Again, I think it's mostly going to be on Nate Tillman to step up, but I do think there's some options with what they could potentially do in the secondary. Potentially we see Jackson Benny move more to that safety position. Maybe we see Jeremiah Caldwell make a move. That is certainly on the table there. So I hope that answers that. Next question. This is a good one. For Utah to go 3-0 against Arizona State, BYU, and Colorado, what are the biggest things that have to happen? And for me, the most important thing for Utah, in any game really, but the most important thing for Utah, and we saw it, what happens when Utah doesn't have it, is Devin Dampier continuing to play good quarterback, right? Good quarterbacking is what Utah needs out of Dampier to have a chance. So that's first and foremost, right? You've got to have your guy at the helm continue to play well. And I think what we saw against West Virginia is a very good sign of what Dampier can be. We talk a lot about the vertical game and needing to take more shots down the field. And I do think that's important. And that's something I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. But I think, just continuing to be efficient and connect on opportunities down the field. Dampier has to continue to be the guy for Utah in order for them to have any sort of shot at going 3-0 against these three teams. So, we've talked about it, in previous episodes. Dampier doesn't need to be Superman all season long, but he might need to be Superman in certain moments, in certain stretches. And I think what you're hoping to see is, him elevating his game potentially over these next 3 weeks. And I think that's going to be key for Utah in these upcoming games. The next big key for me is actually the defensive tackle room getting healthy and maintaining that health. And that centers primarily around getting Aliki Vamahi and Dallas Vakalahi as healthy as possible. And I think, there's reason to be optimistic that both will be back in time for Arizona State, but it's going to be important that they're, as close to 100%. Obviously, you're never going to be 100% as we progress through the season, but getting healthy and keeping those guys healthy is going to be key, because you're going to be welcoming Arizona State, who loves to run the ball. You're going to be going to Provo, where they like to run the ball. And then you've got Colorado, who may not like to run the ball, but they like to run it a little bit more than they did last year. And so I think that's going to be a key. And, with the health, I think, it's been really encouraging to see somebody like Jonah Lea'ea step up and become a bit of a playmaker in that defensive tackle position. He's credited with 17 total tackles right now, 9 of which by himself. He's got a forced fumble and he's got 8 pressures. And I think, he spent all off season putting on weight. He's hovering around 285, 290 pounds now. And I think it's really benefited him. And he's played a really good role for Utah inside. And I think maintaining that for him, as they continue to work Vamahi and Vakalahi back into the rotation, as you maybe incorporate some of these freshmen, right, with Carson Kafusi and Pupu Sepulona, who has also played, he played really well against West Virginia. I think, that's going to be key for this upcoming stretch for Utah, is getting this tackle room healthy, because you're going to be put to the test, with the run game. And then beyond that, I think the offensive line has to continue to play at the level we saw against West Virginia. I think they, obviously we know that Texas Tech, that was the test. That was the litmus test in terms of, the ceiling and what this team could potentially be. And I think the offensive line didn't have their best. They didn't play their best in that matchup. You have to give credit to Texas Tech for taking it to Utah. And I think now that the offensive line kind of understands, what it's going to take against an elite level defensive line, I think that should be encouraging for them moving forward. And so I think we saw that group get back to a level where they asserted their dominance. They played with absolute physicality and we saw a lot of moments where they were just pricks on the field. And I think that's going to be really, really important for Utah moving forward. And with that offensive line, I think, another big factor is Utah, the run game and the running backs in particular have to find a way to generate more yardage with the blocking that they're getting up front. They have to get more juice for the squeeze than what they're getting right now. Utah's offensive line is doing a tremendous job of generating a lot of push, right? Line yards is something that I talk about, and Utah is towards the top of the conference in that metric. But when you start to look at, some of these other metrics for running backs, second level yards, open field yards, Utah isn't doing quite as well. They're in the bottom half of the Big 12 in both of those metrics. And so I think that's going to be important for Utah, is getting more juice for the squeeze with their run game. And so I think that's going to be key. And then obviously the last thing is the secondary has to continue to progress. I thought they made a big improvement from from Texas Tech to West Virginia, but obviously, West Virginia doesn't have the sort of talent that Tech does. But in terms of just evaluating the play and footwork and fundamentals of the defensive secondary, there were some good signs of progress, specifically with Scooby Davis. I thought Jackson Benny, for the time that he was in on the defensive side of the ball, that he played well. And then Smith Snowden as well. I think he's going to be key to all of it in these next 3 games. So I think that's going to be a big key is the secondary, and Smith Snowden specifically has to play a big role, in coverage against these next 3 opponents. And I talked about the run game, and next question is, after 3 carries that put his speed on display, does Utah need to get true freshman Daniel Bray more opportunities? And Whittingham said it himself that they do need to get him probably more involved than he has been this season, which has been not at all. And I think we all sort of had the same reaction when we saw Daniel Bray take that first handoff. It was almost immediate, where you could see the speed, you could see the burst, and what it meant, what it did, in terms of creating yards, right? Just that speed and ability to get to the edge, to make guys miss. I think he was really impressive. And I think that is going to be something where, I just talked about needing to get more juice for the squeeze. I think Bray can help you in that sense, to potentially add some home run ability to that running back room. And so obviously with Bray's top end speed, it's unique in that running back room. You like what you have in N'Kerry Rogers. You like what you have in Wayshawn Parker, who's had, a handful of big plays this season. Rogers is more of your downhill runner, and Parker is your playmaker right now. But I think there's plenty of room to incorporate Bray into this mix, to add even another change of pace, where you bring that speed onto the field and you potentially add another home run threat. I think that's going to be key, especially as Utah has lost somebody like Hunter Andrews and Smith Snowden, with probably, him needing to play more on the defensive side of the ball over those next 3 games. I think Bray getting those opportunities against West Virginia and performing and executing the way that he did, and popping, off the page like he did, I think is kind of timely, where you can now incorporate him to alleviate some of the need for Snowden on the offensive side of the ball. Then too, right, we're already almost halfway through the season, which is sad to say. It sucks, but you add him into the mix, you've got some fresh legs. And I think that is something that, I think we saw what that looked like with those 3 carries he had, what that can be. And it adds more to the playbook for Beck and what they can do. Now with that, right, you don't want it to be to the point where whenever he's on the field, that he's getting a carry or he's going to be involved in some way. I think that's kind of what defense has picked up on with Smith Snowden. And so, it's going to be on Bray to expand sort of his game and what he can contribute in. He can't be a reliability in pass protection. He's got to understand his assignments if that's what he needs to do. Ball security, he protected the ball against West Virginia. I think that's going to be key, but that has to be a priority for him above all else, is protecting the football, right? I think there is absolutely room for Utah to get Bray, 3, 5, 6, 7 touches maybe. I would love to see him involved in the passing game. That was something that he was able to do at North Crowley High School as a junior and senior, was be involved in the passing game. He can be a downfield threat, and that is certainly something that I think has been a missing element in Beck's offense. So, I think Bray should absolutely get some work moving forward. Next question. What is the next progression in this offense in order for us to take the next step? And, to this question, he prefaced it with the downfield passing attack against West Virginia and establishing that, and asking now what is the next progression for the offense. And I think with that, right? It's less a schematic thing and more about player development, right? So Utah added or made the downfield passing game a priority against West Virginia, and I think they, Dampier did a tremendous job making throws and guys making plays for him, and I think that's going to be key for Utah moving forward to preserve, the space that they have to execute blocks in the run game, and I think it's going to be important to continue to attack downfield. But I think the next phase or next evolution for the offense is more about personnel than scheme, and I think right now in the passing game specifically, you have Ryan Davis and you have Dylan Bentley, who are the unquestioned top two pass catchers in this offense. But I think for Utah to take the next step as an offense, they have to find a reliable third and fourth option in the passing game. And I think the two guys that come to mind first and foremost in that conversation is Tobias Merriweather and JJ Buchanan. With Merriweather specifically, he's been targeted 17 times, which is third most on the team, but he's only got 6 receptions so far this season. And so, it's been a struggle, and I think the chemistry has just been off just a fraction through this point of the season. And there's been some literally just inches away from Dampier and Merriweather connecting on a big play, which it's just the chemistry just isn't there. So what's it going to take to get Merriweather more involved in the offense? And obviously, first and foremost is reps, right? With Merriweather not getting here until the summer, put him behind the 8 ball in terms of reps and chemistry, like he has with Davis and Bentley. But reps, I think it's going to be vital for Dampier and Merriweather to spend a lot of time together these next 2 weeks, to get a lot of throws together these next 2 weeks. And beyond that, I think, there's other things that they can do. They can watch film together to get an idea of, so they can get on the same page in terms of what they're seeing defensively and where they're missing things, where they can get on the same page in terms of, where the ball needs to go and that sort of stuff. So watching film will be a key to developing that chemistry. And then too, I think Beck can also do a lot to, scheme up some opportunities for Merriweather, and that doesn't have to be vertical shots, right? Ryan Davis isn't the most explosive athlete, but he's finding a way to get open pretty consistently underneath. He's been, I don't have the numbers, but he's been, the primary target, the first option read on a number of the majority of these plays, and for good reason, right? When you look at his receptions to targets, it's a very good number. He's hauling in a high percentage of his targets. He's a very reliable option for Dampier, and it makes sense that that would continue to be, he would be the focal point of the passing game. But I think Beck can do more to make Merriweather the first read in certain moments. And I think that is a way to get him some looks, to get him some touches, to get him involved. I think that is something that has to happen in order for Utah to evolve and take that next step. And then with JJ, similarly, I'm really impressed with JJ in terms of the athleticism that he brings to that room. We've seen him convert on a couple of opportunities in the end zone on that corner route. He's been really fantastic, high pointing catches and being a reliable source or a reliable option for Dampier. And I think too, Utah can look to him potentially as as maybe the third option in the passing game with what he's done and sort of the trust factor that Dampier seems to have in him as well. So I think that is going to be, the big key to this Utah offense taking that next step is finding reliable third and fourth options in the passing game. And then, just to kind of piggyback off of that, we saw the big plays against West Virginia, right? We saw the downfield passing attack lead to some chunk yardage, some explosives that we haven't seen this season, right? The 32-yard touchdown to Davis, a couple 20-yard receptions with Dallin Bentley. It's going to be important for Utah to sustain that sort of level of explosiveness in the passing game. And then, continue to build, the intermediate game by utilizing all parts of the field, the sidelines, the middle of the field, and developing greater chemistry, in those areas of the passing attack. So I think that's going to be key for Utah in taking that next step is, again, finding a third and fourth option in the passing game, guys that can be reliable, and then continuing to sustain a good level of explosiveness through the air. And then the last question, this is a good one. What are the biggest differences you've seen between Beck's New Mexico offense and Beck's Utah offense? And I think first and foremost, it's the tight end position and the utilization there. Beck has used tight ends quite a bit this season, which was not something that he did at New Mexico because he didn't have the tight ends to utilize. So we've seen Dallin Bentley emerge as a primary option in the passing game. Bentley has been on the field for the majority of plays, but even beyond that, you're incorporating a Lander Barton, you're incorporating or were a Hunter Andrews, who was kind of that H-back type, that Brant Keithy type. JJ Buchanan has gone back and forth between tight end and wide receiver, and it doesn't really matter. He's a big body, and I think he counts just as much as the tight end as he does receivers. So I think Beck has done a good job of utilizing personnel and the strengths and what Utah has with that tight end position, and I think that is the big difference, the biggest difference from last year to this year. Another big difference I've noticed is the red zone offense. And Dampier was he was everything. He meant everything to New Mexico's red zone offense. It was QB run centric, and it was QB draws, QB counters, QB power reads, everything to get him into the end zone. Beck knew that he was his best athlete on the field, and that's what led to Dampier, accounting for 19 touchdowns, last season, was his red zone usage. And what we've seen this year is it turned to more of a standard red zone offense where he's getting the ball out in the passing game, right? He's got a number of touchdown passes in the red zone. Utah's also utilized Nakari Rogers and others in the red zone. And I think that's been a big difference is he's looking to spread the wealth a little bit in the red zone. He's got the weapons to utilize there. And I think that has been another change from last year, is moving away from the Devin Dampier show in the red zone to more of just standard red zone offense. And I think that's been good because Beck knows that he can always go back to Dampier and getting him, like we saw against West Virginia, he can use those QB keepers. It's just he doesn't need to use them because that's his only option. He can use it because maybe it's his best option, but he's got plenty of other options now to utilize in the offense. And then, another thing that I've seen is the blocking schemes and the run blocking schemes, and what we've seen there with utilizing the tackles and their athleticism, getting Lomu on some of these counters and Spencer Fano out into space. And we've seen a lot of some gap schemes. We've seen a lot of duo. And I think that's been a change from last year for Beck. They're still running to the same areas of the field, right? Last year's run game was a lot to the outside, and that's been the case at Utah this year. But there's different blocking schemes to get that done, and I think that's been fun. I was very curious with Beck coming in. I asked him specifically back in, it was either fall camp or spring ball. I'm pretty sure it was spring ball that I asked this, but I asked him about how you utilize the strength of this offense, and that being, the offensive line and those offensive tackles. And Beck said, we're going to get them out into space. We're going to use their athleticism, to our advantage. And that's what we've seen with some of this run blocking scheme type stuff is, they're using counters, they're using powers, they're using pullers and all that sort of stuff to keep the run game, going. And I think that's been a lot of fun. So yeah, I think, the tight end usage, the red zone identity, the blocking schemes and all of that. I think those have been the three biggest differences from last year to this year with Beck's offense. So that'll do it for me. I'll be back at it tomorrow, probably with a pretty heavy basketball episode. Going to break down some of the comments from Wes Wilcox, Alex Jensen, and the players. And really looking forward to this year's Running Youth squad, what this team is going to look like. So, I'm excited to dive into that tomorrow. So appreciate everybody for tuning in. Like I said earlier, go to the podcast page, give us that 5-star rating, go to YouTube, look for us up on KSL Sports YouTube page, go watch the videos. I appreciate everybody that's supported the Blockcast. It means a lot. It means the world to me, and excited to get back at it tomorrow.